for joining this roundtable discussion. I'm Rani Britto from SAS. At SAS, curiosity is our code. SAS analytics solutions transform data into intelligence, inspiring customers around the world to make bold new discoveries that drive progress. SAS is the leader in analytics. Through innovative software and services, SAS empowers and inspires customers around the world to transform data into intelligence. SAS gives you the power to know. Our topic for the roundtable today is SAS in the open ecosystem. With our panel, we will discuss how a unifying platform can bring together diverse data and analytics to drive measurable value for your organization. We have a panel from SAS for this discussion. George Silva is joining us from Raleigh in North Carolina. Hi, George. Manisha joining us from Singapore, and Jian Ching joining us from Sydney. George, Manisha, and YJ, could you please introduce yourselves before we get into the session?
Absolutely. Good morning, Rani. At least good morning for me. I am Jorge Silva. My team develops algorithms for SAS and mostly focused on machine learning and other types of analytics. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, George. Lovely to see such a multicultural, multinational panel across different countries. My name is Manisha, and I lead the cloud data analytics practice for Asia Pacific for SAS. And day to day, I interact with multiple customers across this region in solving their data analytics challenges. So very nice to have you all today.
Thanks, Manisha. Thanks, George. So my name's Jian. I'm part of Manisha's cloud data and analytics practice. So my specialization is really within the analytics, specifically open source analytics realm. So my day-to-day is really around advising organizations all around Asia Pacific on how to use open source analytics and SAS together at an enterprise level.
Thank you for that. Thank you, George, Manisha, and YJ. So Manisha, I'll start with you. You work with several organizations and talk to several clients. What do you think are the typical AI and analytics challenges that businesses are facing today?
Well, Rani, excellent question. In fact, this is a question which I get asked almost every day. And, I want to start off by saying that if you look at the world of AI today and you look at businesses, the overall potential and total annual value which businesses can unlock from AI is actually more than $10 trillion. So opportunities are huge, and it's not surprising that a lot of organizations are investing as well as innovating their businesses with the use of AI. But talking about challenges, it's never an easy journey when you're on an innovation curve. And there are a couple of challenges which I want to bring across the table here for discussion with rest of the panel members here. There are top three which I see, which are really emerging as themes in the industry. Number one, which I believe is a challenge and a very important challenge, cuts across people and the talent war. Data science, we all know, is a very scarce skill. It's hard to hire talent and at the same time to retain good talent in your organizations as well. And, this cuts across people who are very experienced in data science, especially people who have been working with SAS. They have been working on these technologies for years, and it's hard to get that talent in the market. But at the same time, you have these emerging data science citizens who are also experimenting with a lot of open source tools. And at the same time, while they demand flexibility, there's also a lot of job hopping happening, right? So I wouldn't lie about it. So talent war definitely is the first challenge, which I do see recurring as a theme across the industry. Now, the second challenge which I would want to talk about is also collaboration. And this goes back and relates to the first problem of talent war. You would see that, there are various ways. Different data scientists are creating sets using multiple languages. There are people who prefer SAS. There are people who prefer open source. But I think what is lacking today in the industry is how these entire different talent pool can interact and collaborate with each other. So that's something which I believe is a challenge which continues to exist in the industry. And collaboration and getting these people together in one single ecosystem is really the need of the hour. The third one I would talk about, which I think is also a very important aspect, we have this scarce skill set in the market who's creating wonderful assets, applying different wide variety of algorithms to solve different business problems. But where we are seeing a lot of challenges across our customers is really in the last mile delivery. And I'll give you some numbers around it. And these numbers are very intriguing, right? You can imagine, for the models this talent pool develops, only 50%, in fact less than 50% of these models go into production. And there might be issues in efficacy, there might be data issues or various reasons, but only 50% is what you are really productionizing right now. And at the same time, now if you look at this 50% of what you're productionizing, the only 90% of these, right? So if you look at the last mile delivery, on an average, a lot of our clients tell us that it takes roughly 3 to 6 months to deploy a model to production. So last mile delivery is definitely another problem. And this is something which I'm hearing time and again repeatedly from our customers.
Okay. George and YJ, do you want to add anything to that?
Absolutely. So you are absolutely on the spot that deployment is the greatest challenge that businesses face. And also, I want to mention that you talk about different languages, and that is critical. In an organization, you are going to have teams that are more going to be using Python for their development. You're going to be having teams that have R for their deployment. Depends really on their background and what type of products they're developing. There's a very well-established user base that uses SAS for their development. How do you make sure that you can consume models created by these different teams, put them in the same pipeline, and make sure to deploy for your business? That is the challenge, and it is not an easy challenge. Absolutely important to have an ecosystem that unifies these disparate sources.
Yeah. George, YJ, did you want to add something there?
Oh, I just would reinforce those and agree. If you take a step back and basically see how the market in data analytics as a whole has evolved, this is logically where it's been coming to for the last few years, right? So, a few years ago we had big data. Then organizations found out what they want to do with their data, and then came along, the machine learning hype, which, thanks to the open source software model, analytics modeling has been so commoditized and accessible that now I think a lot of organizations have been very successful building a lot of models. And that's the question, the challenge right now, which is how do we start getting value out of all of the models and investment that we've built, especially accelerated with open source. So I think it's just reflective of the times we're in.
Okay, great. So just taking a step back, I think there's just a whole number of choices, right, of different languages. And while it's great to democratize analytics, what kind of challenges does this create? All these different choices from the eyes of a data scientist. Do you think that there's a lot of option fatigue? Like, how do they go about, picking these choices?
I can go first if you like, George.
Yeah,
this is something that's pretty close to what I do, right? I feel like having choices is the nature of open source, because it's what makes it good. Because the accelerated innovation, all sorts of things that people in the community are developing and building, part of the reason why open source has been so successful is that new innovations keep coming in every day. And I feel like at least the good data scientists are always the ones who are always on top of understanding what's happening in the market, what's happening in the technology landscape, so they know what tools they can use to make their job the most effective. That's just what I've seen, talking, whether I'm at like a big event or just talking to some of the organizations that we speak to. The good data scientists are always the ones who are on top of that. So I think that's fairly natural. I feel like it's maybe other parts of the business that they are interacting with that maybe might not be so enthusiastic, but probably have to put up with it anyway. So I mean, for example, like the IT organization or the people at those companies who are managing and provisioning the environments so the data science can work the best. They have to be on top of it because that's what the data scientists and analysts are telling them. But they have to make sure, of course, this is passing all the security checks, all the governance checks, and they have to be on top because they always have to provision the right environments, the right tools, so that those data scientists can always, be effective, right? So I feel like it's probably more natural for those analysts, and probably something that IT or the other personas or teams that they're working around have to help understand.
Okay. That's
Right.
very.
And one of the problems with choice, which is obviously a very positive in general, but the average open source library contains 30 to 60 dependencies on other libraries, which themselves depend on yet other libraries. So all those libraries have versions. And like you said, those versions change every day because new contributions are made every day, and which creates a problem. How to make sure that those versions, security checks and security scans are made, no security vulnerabilities are found. Also, what versions are stable, which versions should be skipped. That creates an exponentially growing maintenance problem that preferably should be avoided if that's not the core business of your organization. And that creates a great opportunity for commercial entities like ourselves, who also include, like everybody else, we include open source in our own products and we use them in our own tooling. It creates an opportunity for curation, creates an opportunity for a process control, and for making sure that whatever snapshot of or versions of a certain release of libraries you get have been checked for security and are good to use.
It seems like a lot. It seems like a lot of choices, right? And a lot of different considerations for choosing one against the other. So Manisha, where do you, SAS has been around for, over 40 years, and we are deeply embedded. We are within 96% of all the Fortune 500 companies. So where do you see organizations using open source versus SaaS, and what do you see, open source and SaaS? How do you see them using it?
In
Where do
fact,
you see it?
Rani, it's a great question, and in fact, on that topic of choice, there's a famous saying that choice, basically it's our right, and the idea is not to limit people on what they want to use, but at the same time, I think the question then becomes, and George and YJ brought those points around governance, right? As an organization, there is this accountability which the organization still has to make sure things are done in the right manner. And going back to your question on which industries do we see SaaS and open source being used, I think a lot of industries are using both. Specifically, when I talk about SaaS, we do see a lot of use of SaaS, and we continue to see the use of SaaS models as well as SaaS applications in a lot of industries which are regulated, where the questions of accountability are important, the questions of regulations are important, the questions of delivering the right outcomes for the customers are important, because SaaS is known for precision, SaaS is known for scale, and this is what a lot of organizations do believe and understand. So we are still continue to see use of SaaS in areas of credit risk, in area of fraud risk management, in the area of customer insights and marketing, and many others. But more commonly in the regulated industries, I do see and continue to see SaaS being the choice of tool and the language, also because a lot of regulations and regulators are comfortable with what has been already developed and tested. Now, open source is also very commonly used, right? It's also where I am personally seeing a lot of open source use is in areas where a lot of innovation is happening, and this is where I think the power of community, power of open source comes in as well, with choices of languages, with choices of tools, with the speed at which a particular data scientist who is comfortable with a certain language is able to deploy and create models and experiment. Open source is definitely picked up a lot.
George and YJ, do you agree? I think open source is really it's very useful for incubation, right? Trying out new ideas in sandboxes, trying out new innovation. What do you see?
I see the open source as essentially a way to scale up development and, like you say, innovation and exploration to hundreds of thousands of developers across the world. Excuse me. So we should embrace that. We should embrace that innovation and that pace, and we should. Sure, there's a lot of choice. Some of the focus of open source is on having quickly something that produces impressive results, and not necessarily on the nuts and bolts of quality control and checking. That often comes in later versions, and especially for the most important libraries. In the area of machine learning, some examples of those libraries: PyTorch, TensorFlow. Those are mature, polished. They have so many contributors and so many users that the quality control comes naturally with contributions from the community. But one thing I want to emphasize is SAS itself is part of that community, and we do have an interest in continuing to make sure those libraries are well polished. We are users as well, and our customers are users of those libraries. And SAS has an open architecture, which enables customers to have the best of both worlds, really. Our own analytics, as well as analytics that can be developed sometimes in-house, sometimes using contribution from consulting arms of our own company, which help develop and integrate open source solutions with our out-of-the-box analytics. Really, there are many, many exciting possibilities here. And it's all made easier and possible through an infrastructure which takes all those pieces from different open source libraries and integrates them in a process. Remember that at the end of the day, you're a business and you want to create value. So a model is useless unless it can be deployed. And when you deploy a model and that model is generating revenue for you, you want to control how that model was trained, based on what data, what was the data lineage, what steps, what teams, and with what quality controls that model went through. Like you said, it takes a long time for a model to be developed. Also, very importantly, it's easy in terms of pressing buttons to train a new model, but not necessarily cheap. In terms of money, in terms of time, in terms of carbon footprint. There was one statistic that I looked at the other day, which kind of shocked me. Your average AI-based model, especially if it involves deep learning and image processing, spends one model to train it, spends as much carbon as 5 cars during their entire lifetimes. So that gives us pause, and we want to make sure that those models are worth training and that they do create business value.
Okay. And YJ, like, what do you think? Like, I think, everyone is in a great place where they can take advantage of open source, like, George said, to build scale, but also count on SAS, right? Best of both worlds. So SAS brings the enterprise aspect to it. So what do you see as the challenges that businesses are facing when they just go with only open source, like with only AI and analytics choices in open source?
Yeah, great question. I think we've touched a lot on a lot of those points. I would once again, bring it back to the situation we're in, where it's this problem around deployment. And as we've talked about, model building more than ever has been very accessible and very easy to do. But to George's point, what are you doing the analytics for? How do you make sure it's worth it? And at the end of the day, the things that organizations have to consider is not that they can't do it, a 100% DIY approach using open source. It's should they do it? Lest they end up as some sort of software development house managing this bespoke piece of analytics, when they have other things to worry about, such as their normal lines of business. So I'll give an example of what I mean by this, right? So imagine that you've got a model that's giving out loans, and that is accessible through a web application or mobile application. So, as this example bank, you want to give out provide a loan service to your customers, right? Now, you can do all of that within open source. You can build your Python model. You can make it as great as you want using whatever package, scikit-learn, XGBoost. You can deploy it as a Flask API, serve it through some sort of Docker container, something like that, and it will be great. The question and the challenges that arise then come down to the maintenance of that solution you've created over time, right? So for example, what happens if your model drifts? Because models are data dependent. So the behavior of your customers in terms of their appetites for loans or for that particular line of business might be changing. You need to replace that model. So that's the data scientists then talking to the app developers and saying, we need to replace this model. Here are the inputs, here are the outputs. They have to work together. They have to then re-engineer, re-implement that new model. What if now they want to bring in different sources of data? So maybe credit data as part of that solution. So that's another piece of engineering they have to go through. What if, as part of the background business conditions, the business has decided that they don't want to give out as many loans anymore, regardless of how well the model's doing? So they're changing cutoffs, they're changing some business rules, some approvals. That's another engineering piece that goes in. That's business talking to app developers who, they mean well, but they don't have the same handle on the business that the other business stakeholders do, right? So you can see that over time as this, you're making changes, this solution is evolving as per the business requirements and how the market's changing. That organization that started with that initial model and application is now managing a piece of software. And that's the big question is, are you a software development house, or are you a bank or a telco or some sort of other agency that has other pressing concerns? Because you might not want your IT resources and people then managing this custom piece of software, right? So that's really the heart of the DIY do-it-yourself approach. Now, there's always going to be room and flexibility to encourage some form of building or loose coupling of software apps as business decided what piece of technology they want from open source. That's best served through APIs, things like that. But at the core, you want an enterprise analytics platform like SAS that's going to offer that basic foundation and basic framework, so that you're not delving into software engineering. So, for example, on the SAS platform, where we have analytical engines for executing Python and SAS through APIs, embedding the business rules and decisioning as part of that a single module under the API, so businesses can make changes without focusing a new engineering effort to the app developers, for example, right? So that's sort of the framework and enterprise, scale and value that we're trying to bring to enhance how businesses use open source, because we don't want them to stop using it, but we want to complement and augment what they're doing.
That's great. That's great, YJ. I think I do agree that there's a increasing recognition among companies that it may be helpful to draw in other technology to integrate open source and other software, right? To really create interoperability and utility from open source. So SAS is, like I said, has been a leader in advanced analytics for over 40 years and is used by several organizations across industries. George, how do you think, can you explain how SAS integrates with open source in more detail?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, open source is often a source of new ideas and new model classes. And that's just the nature of it. It's very connected to the research community. The research community produces new ideas every day, and those ideas become code. We contribute to that process as well. So it's very exciting to be a part of that growing coding and research community. Again, and to many of YJ's points, we are a research company. Our purpose is to make sure that businesses whose main core business is not software engineering don't have to become software engineers just to function. It's a and again, just exactly like YJ put it. Yes, you can do as an organization. You could do all your software in-house. Why would you? That would not be necessarily a good use of your time. We have economies of scale. We have faced many of the same problems in many lines of business. So we have solved, or at least we have come up with the good, sensible solutions for many of the training and deployment and versioning and model lifecycle problems that you are going to face. So that's open source is absolutely not a problem for us. It's we see it as an opportunity, and as creates even more opportunities for us to give value to businesses. Now, how do we integrate open source? In many ways. Again, it's part of our tooling. It is sometimes embedded in our own solutions wherever it makes sense. It is something that we continuously monitor and test and calibrate and make sure that, I mean, we have found bugs in open source, which is not disparaging at all. It's any software has bugs, and the idea is to have a quality assurance process which finds them, mitigates them, corrects, and moves on. This is always going to be a continuing process. But it is important that quality assurance happens, and that some of the less popular aspects of open source and such as security fixes. Remember, no grad student ever got their PhD by making sure that their library was necessarily applying all security fixes. It's not the most exciting part of open source development. But it is an important part for businesses, and therefore commercial organizations need to step up and make sure to find and plug and apply security fixes as needed. Another thing, like YJ mentioned, yes, you can deploy your model. You can create an API for it. You can create a container for it. And then one of the libraries that you used to do that updates their version and breaks one of their internal APIs. And now the app developers need to step in and very quickly fix that. If your organization did it in-house, then that's your problem. That's something that you have and becomes an operational risk for you. If, on the other hand, you are using a commercial vendor who has already harmonized the versions and made sure that those versions work together and gave you a container, that's not your problem anymore. So your life is easier. And that's very much organizations are moving towards a solution where their total cost of ownership is as low as possible, and also where they are moving towards software as a service type of consumption. And software as a service, it changes the game. It all of a sudden you're more worried about hourly usage. You're worried about, okay, I don't need to train a model today, so today I'm not going to be spending CPU hours. I'm not going to be paying my cloud provider necessarily. But next week I need to train a bunch of models. So now you can adjust your billing to your usage. So that's also a very important aspect.
That's great. And George, can you talk about SAS Via? What is SAS Via?
All right, so that is a great question, and that's one I always enjoy answering. At the core, SAS Via is a distributed computation engine and analytical engine, which makes sure that the data and the model training are co-located so that you avoid data movement. So that's the secret that makes it well performant, and that makes it scale. It is essentially a piece of software that runs on multiple machines, and it's cloud native. So it is something that you can use your cloud provider for and spin up your engines, your instances, and essentially make sure that multiple computers can work together to solve complex analytical problems. Give you models, make sure to ingest your data. So it includes data processing, it includes data analytics, it includes model management, it includes Model Studio, which is essentially a pipeline development UI. And I cannot overstate how important it is to think of, especially in machine learning, to think of these processes as self-documenting pipelines. remember this, whenever you have a process that created the model, your data scientists may be around now, but 6 months from now, when there's team turnover and that knowledge is out the door, it's going to be very useful for you to have a self-documenting pipeline that essentially are blocks connected to each other and say, okay, this data came from this source, it was imputed this way, pre-processed, then a number of models was trained together. The champion model was this particular one. This is the assessment. And it can repeat this process even with a new team. And this is made possible by tight integration with the data management, with the analytics, with the model training, and then model deployment, and model management. That turned this from an exercise made by a specific team that can leave your organization at any time, to a business process that's self-documented and that your organization owns and manages.
Okay, it sounds like a Via is a really powerful analytic platform. Manisha and YJ, do you have any use cases or recent examples of how customers are using Via?
Well, Rani, there are a lot of use cases. In fact, there is no limit to what use cases you can think of using Via. But some very common ones, and I'll come from a banking perspective. Some very common ones, as I shared earlier, we have seen is a lot of innovation using Via happening in the industry in areas like communication surveillance, where you're applying text mining to look at chat messages and looking at how RMs are interacting with their clients. There are other use cases I've seen where we are talking about a complete shift or change in behavior of a customer and trying to see how we can personalize, in fact, hyper personalized communications to customers to make them, to basically increase cross selling and upselling and obviously achieve revenue goals for our clients. We've also seen applications in fraud detection space. Couple of themes which I commonly hear is, I already have systems in place. How can I reduce my false positives? Because I'm spending billions of dollars having teams of people who are analyzing cases day in and day out. So analytics and AI machine learning obviously have a great play in those kind of areas as well. So use cases, Rani, are really limitless, and I'm so excited to see many of our customers thinking of innovative areas where they can apply these technologies, and at the same time backed by an organization who has deep bench and strength in these topics.
Okay. And Manisha, we talked a lot about the variety in open source, open ecosystem. So given that there's all these choices and data scientists are building models across different languages, do you see a need for overall model governance? And do you think there's an urgency today? Can you talk to us a little bit about model governance?
Absolutely, Rani. In fact, this is a topic which comes in almost every conversation we go to. But I think we have to go back to the scale and the problem we are trying to solve. So I'll give you a few examples, because there's definitely a wide variety of customers we deal with. There are customers who are still, let's say, having 10 to 15 teams of data science. Perhaps they have not reached that cycle where governance and scale is a problem, but they definitely can foresee this will be a problem in future. So they are investing right ahead in our products, in our services, to make sure they are prepared for the future. At the same time, if I look at the other end of the spectrum, there are customers who have thousands and thousands of models, 300 plus data scientists working on same platform, sharing assets, collaborating with each other, and at the same time, with single click, being able to deploy models to production. So I think the spectrum of our clients and customers is huge. I have seen different scales and sizes, and I think one theme which is coming across, for some customers who are at a certain scale, model governance is very relevant today. Having said that, I think we should talk about the theme of regulations which are emerging. Just a couple of months ago, there is a law being discussed in Europe around AI and its governance. And across various parts of the world, there are many regulators who are trying to adopt and devise principles and frameworks around AI governance. So regardless of which scale and size you are in, regardless of wherever you are in your journey with your AI applications, model governance is a very important topic. And I do think there is a immediate need in the industry to adopt these best practices, to think ahead, and be at the edge of the curve, to make sure you're prepared for the future.
Okay, great. And Manisha, going back to the first, question, you said one of the big challenges was, getting talent, right? Given that a lot of this talent has been working in open source, how easy is it for them to also, work with Via?
Well, I would say for the customers I have seen, this experience is very seamless. So it's really about choice and control. There are customers who have data science teams and very young data scientists who are brilliant in what they do, and they are able to quickly use a Jupyter notebook and be able to quickly code their algorithms in Python, but at the same time leverage the SAS environment where they're able to access a governed data set. They're able to track lineage, they're able to deploy their models, they're also able to compare the results of their Python model with what SAS is recommending as a best model. And all of this, when this happens in one single environment, you can't even imagine what kind of collaboration it can create, what kind of innovation it can create across our customers. So Rani, yes, I am seeing a lot of seamless integration happening, where SAS is really helping and adding value to our customers who are using open source, is really in governance as well as the last mile deployment. I think this is where we also augment open source quite a lot, giving people the choice of tools, but at the same time also making sure the organization is well protected and covered for the future.
Okay, that's great. And George, I know you're a professor too, right? So you have students and you talk to students. So how do you see this? I mean, they're all, I'm sure, good at open source and they know different languages. And we have SAS Via. So do you see that it's pretty easy for them to work with both?
It is seamless. That is a very positive aspect of Via, is if you are used to working in your Jupyter notebook and have your favorite libraries, nothing prevents you from doing so. You can use Via. Literally what you need to do is import a module in Python, connect to a server, and keep going. So that experience is very seamless. The architecture is open. And it allows you to mix and match. So really, it allows you to have the best of both worlds. And you are right. As a professor in computer science, I see a great deal of drifting towards Python, and also more for statistical students often are as their languages of choice. It's important to be cognizant and support our users in these languages. So that's at the same time, let me tell you, as someone who has significant Python experience, sometimes when I want to do something as simple as impute missing data on a data set, nothing exciting, just something that needs to be done, bread and butter, it's nice to be able to do it in 3 lines in SAS language. So it is definitely worth the investment in learning the SAS programming language. But at the end of the day, organizations need to be able to support all of them. And students and practitioners in this field have an interest in being at least conversant in a variety of languages so that they don't lock themselves out of any career paths. So that's the world we live in, and it's okay. We should embrace it.
That's great. And George, again, being a professor, do you have any words of advice? I'm sure a lot of career aspirants, young data scientists are watching this. And what advice do you have for them in terms of what they should be, what skills they should be building for the future?
I would say that the most important skill that a student in this area or a practitioner in this area needs is math and critical thinking. Languages come and go. Their hype cycles oscillate. Nobody can predict the future, nor should we try. We should keep our skill set as general as possible. At the same time, there is so many exciting opportunities coming up. And the AI field is exploding. Like people have said in this panel, there are potential trillions of dollars of business value. There are significant challenges. Be aware of the context in which AI is used. Regulation is coming. It's only going to be more strict. And the people are rightfully going to be asking questions about AI models. Are they fair? Have they been biased against, gender, other protected groups? Are these models making decisions that affect people's lives based on good practices? And as an organization, you may not have the bandwidth or the team or the skill set to keep up with the literature and with the research being done on this field. As a commercial company, that is something that we do and that we do keep up and contribute to those fields. So it's much easier for you to stay compliant by using the services of a commercial organization that keeps up and that has faced these problems before and has resolved them.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for your advice there, George and Manisha. So how do we, given that AI, a lot of companies are looking at different AI use cases, and AI is not in the future, but it's in the present, and it's going to be really big in the future. How can Via and open source help organizations to set up themselves for AI, for taking advantage of AI? And George, YJ, Manisha, any one of you weigh in.
Oh, okay, I'll go first. So as we talked about, we complement, we enhance open source, and not only from the perspective of integrated functionally, so that you can use, your language, your tools of choice, but also as a process, right? So I think back to some of the examples we've talked about, where you've got, let's say, a model that needs to be updated or retrained, rebuilt on new data. Maybe you're building a new set of models, you've got a new set of problems. How do you automate some of those steps? Because arguably they should be automated, so you can do it as fast as possible. The turnaround time is extremely quick to meet new market conditions as your models may be drifting, or you want to change your cutoffs. But you also still want to have governance around it. You still want to have that link in the chain that that someone in the business made this decision to deploy the certain model, which goes back to setting it up for AI, because no matter what technology, whether it's or what type of analytics you're using, whether it's a simple predictive model or something more complicated like a convolutional neural network you're using on image or video data or whatever, you still want to have oversight and governance over that process. So one of the hallmarks or key parts of the SAS Via platform is this ability to orchestrate workflows and orchestrate essentially what is this model lifecycle, or what they call we call in the industry ML ops or model ops, right? Which is, how do you ensure consistency in the production of your model? How do you ensure that it can be automated, it can be repeatable, and you enable fast feedback, so monitoring of your analytics in their production state and have the update to do so. So that orchestration of that lifecycle process is key and a really significant part of how Via can help. And the last differentiation point that I want to make is that when we're talking about deployment, operationalization, it's not in the realm of just the data scientists anymore, right? It's the business, IT, and so on. That orchestration of that process should involve all of those stakeholders, right? So it should involve the data scientists. It should involve and integrate with some of the IT processes that might have been created, whether you are a more handcrafted, less mature, small organization with only a few models, or a more advanced, mature organization where you might have some mature DevOps or CI/CD processes, how to integrate with what you're doing there, and then but still have that business oversight so you can keenly identify, I made this decision, this model led to X amount of uplift, or we need it's not, or Y amount of, value, justify that, and then see where in that process that those decisions have been made. So you have the oversight over your machine learning and indeed AI systems.
Okay, that's great. And Manisha, just you talked about regulatory developments in the AI space. Could you tell us what would be the top one or two considerations you would advise for better preparing for these changes?
Yes, Rani, in fact, I'll answer these questions from two perspectives. One is from an operational perspective, and going back to the question of, what do you need in your organization to have an AI initiative being successful, and also look at, how and what the regulators are demanding. And I think these are quite interlinked in my view. When you look at, from an operational lens, right, and you're embedding AI, you know who your end consumers are, right? So your end consumers are various businesses, right, who are interacting with their own consumers, which could be end customers of an institution, or it could be their regulators, right? So a lot of these questions which are being asked today by the end customers to the businesses is, how is AI going to impact me, right? Are my rights going to be protected? Are you able to explain to me when you used a model, what were the parameters used, what were the features used, how did you derive certain parameters in your algorithms, where are the data points, right? Are you able to trace this from front to back, while you're talking about business value, are you able to show me lineage? So these are real questions which are coming across in the industry, and I do understand a lot of these are important, right? Because the end impact of an AI failure is huge. Now, time and again, especially in the last few years, because of innovation happening in AI, we have also heard a lot of cases where AI has not delivered, right? And a lot of these have come into limelight in past couple of years, and it's no surprise that there are regulation and governance discussions happening in the industry. So one of the regulators which is very actively working in this part of the world, and me, since I'm based in Singapore, I see that development very closely. So since 2018, a Monetary Authority of Singapore launched their principles around AI, and those principles talk about 4 areas. It talks about, and it's commonly known as FEAT, which talks about fairness, ethics, explainability, accountability, and transparency in AI. So and this goes back to, when you think about AI, you want to be successful with your AI initiatives. It is about making sure you are able to have that scale, you're able to have that governance, you're able to have that traceability. Plus, at the same time, you have the right techniques and tools to be able to explain the model, to be able to manage data in the same environment, and also go down to the level to say, is my model fair? Have I chosen the right attributes? Are these attributes, from a data perspective, introducing bias in my model? So a lot of these considerations we need to start thinking through very, very proactively.
Okay. And George, do you want to add anything to this?
Absolutely. So, and this is not these regulatory considerations should not be seen as an excuse to only use certain classes of models. No, I mean, very often models that are considered black box can and should be used, but it is important to have explainability layers around those black box models, and that's one of the things that that we have invested quite a bit in making possible. So that's and I think we're rightly proud of that. It's important to be able to explain all decisions made by all types of models, not just the usual easier ones like linear, trees, etc., but also a deep neural network. How do you explain the decision that was made for a particular user that applied to a loan or for a particular image? How did you classify it as a problem versus not problem? Yeah, to have the ability of answering the question, what were the features, values that made this decision, that led to this decision, I think is a very important feature of any complete analytical engine.
Okay, great. I think this was a great discussion. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Maybe I can go first, and I think we touched upon quite a lot of topics here. But some of the interesting takeaways for me, especially to our audience who are actively working in data science field, innovating or solving business problem. I think one of the important areas is obviously go back to think, what are you doing AI for? It always starts with trying to solve a business problem. Also think about scale. We do understand you need choice of languages and tools, but at the same time, do not forget governance, responsibility, and making sure you have the right checks and balances in place so that longer term you're successful in the industry.
George, YJ?
I'll say that as an organization, you are very likely going to be more of a user of cloud-based solutions and software as a service. That's what most organizations are doing. And it's important as an organization. We should understand that most organizations do not like vendor lock-in, and that's a very valid concern. That's one of the reasons why SAS maintains an open architecture, so that's not necessarily a concern. It's also important for organizations to remember that when they consume a software as a service, one of their major providers is actually going to be their cloud provider. So that's going to be giving a big part of your infrastructure. So it's important to also not fall into the pitfall of becoming locked in, not so much to an analytical vendor, but to a cloud providing vendor, which can become a risk if you are using libraries and tools that are too much dependent on a particular cloud architecture. So having a layer on top of your cloud providers that insulates your business process from any particular cloud provider dependencies can be a very important asset for you as a business. So in essence, think big, think of your process as a whole.
Great.
Yeah. I would follow on from what my colleagues have said, and I guess reinforce some of the early points I made about I think collaboration and all the different parts of the business that come together to make analytics ultimately successful, right? So that is we talked a lot about technology. Talked about and a lot about what some of the value that we provide and open source, but from all the organizations that at least I've interacted and spoken to, one of the biggest hurdles is just the collaboration part, the different parts of the business, the data scientists, the analysts, and the IT folks that we've said how they can come together and align and work together. So I think in order to be successful, one of the most important things is to ensure that all of these stakeholders are aligned and they're on the same page, and aligned on the technology that needs to be used to best serve the business. And of course, those stakeholders who are closest to that should articulate those benefits as best as possible. But also, to Manisha's point of ultimately, what is this doing and how is this serving the business? And the sooner that all those three main parts of the business and any others, depending on your organization, as soon as those main parts of the business are aligned, then there will be success.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you, Manisha. Thank you, George. And thank you, YJ, for a great discussion. I think the key takeaway is SAS is open. SAS works with open source, and together we are better, right? I hope the session was really insightful. Thank you for joining. Please do get in touch with SAS with any questions you may have. If you want to reach us individually, please find us on LinkedIn. We are happy to talk to you, answer any of your questions. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Rani. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.